December 28th, 1944. The Wolf's Lair is silent, but the maps are screaming. To the casual observer, the Third Reich is not dying, it is coiling for a strike. On the situation tables in Berlin, the markers for Operation Nordwind are placed with the confidence of a gambler who believes he has already won. General Johannes Blaskowitz, commanding Army Group G, looks at the order of battle. It is formidable. The 21. Panzer Division, the 25. Panzer Grenadier Division, the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division. These are not ghost units. These are hardened veterans, equipped with the finest armored vehicles engineering has ever produced. The Panther G tanks are brand new, their 75mm cannons glistening with oil, their optics calibrated, their crews desperate for revenge. The plan is a masterstroke of operational art, a dual thrust designed to sever the American 7th Army, recapture Strasbourg, and humiliate the Allies in the Alsace. On paper, it is flawless. On paper, the geometric lines of advance cut through the American defenses like a scalpel. But war is not fought on paper. What the maps in Berlin do not show, what Adolf Hitler refuses to see, is not the enemy in front of the tanks, but the enemy inside them. A panzer division is a living organism. It breathes air, it eats ammunition, but most importantly, it drinks fuel. Without fuel, a 45-ton Panther is nothing more than a static steel bunker, a monument to wasted engineering. And in the depots behind the German lines, the math is already beginning to fail. The operational planning for Nordwind was built on a standard logistical assumption. A Panther tank consumes roughly 280 liters of fuel for every 100 kilometers on a road. This is the handbook number. It is the number used by staff officers sitting in warm bunkers in Berlin. It is the number that makes the operation look possible. But the Alsace in January is not a test track. It is a frozen hellscape of twisting mountain roads, black ice, and gradients that defy standard calculations. General Blaskowitz knows something the planners ignored. When a 45-ton machine has to climb a 15-degree incline on ice, the driver cannot simply drive. He must rev the Maybach engine to its limit. He must slip the clutch. He must fight the tracks against the frozen earth. The consumption does not stay at 2.8 liters per kilometer. It spikes. It doubles. In the low gears required to navigate the Vosges mountains, a Panther begins to drink fuel at a rate of 7 liters per kilometer. This is the 7-liter miscalculation. It is a discrepancy of over 200%. It means that every fuel truck sent to the front is effectively carrying less than half of what is needed to move the army the same distance. The orders from OKW are explicit. The objective must be reached at all costs. The fuel reserves allocated for the operation are sufficient for the initial breakthrough, but sufficient is a political word, not a mathematical one. The allocated fuel allows for 500 kilometers of movement per vehicle. But if the consumption is 7 liters instead of 2.8, that range is not 500 kilometers. It is barely 150, and the Americans are not 150 kilometers away. They are dug in, mobile, and backed by a logistical system that has never known shortage. As the engines of the 21st Panzer Division roar to life in the pre-dawn darkness, the crews check their gauges. They are full. They feel powerful. They do not yet realize that they are driving into a mathematical trap. The countdown to zero has already begun, and it is ticking much faster than anyone in Berlin is willing to admit. The catastrophe is not waiting in the American lines. It is waiting in the fuel pumps. The clock does not stop for logistical failures. As the 0 hour of Operation Nordwind passes, the German war machine attempts to recreate the lightning speed of 1,940 inches, the claustrophobic corridors of the Vosges. The initial breakthrough is violent and effective. The American thin lines, stretched to the breaking point, buckle under the shock of concentrated panzer fire. To the generals in Berlin, the early reports are intoxicating. They see the arrows moving on the map. They see the captured villages. They see the momentum. But on the ground, the momentum is being strangled by the very earth it seeks to conquer. The Blitzkrieg was designed for the plains of Poland and the paved highways of France environments, where velocity is a function of will. In the mountains of Alsace, velocity is a function of physics, and physics is a cruel master. A Panther tank is a masterpiece of high-velocity hoa look and sloped armor, but it is also a 45-ton metal beast that requires immense energy to move against gravity. As the columns of the 21st Panzer Division begin their ascent into the high passes, the 7-liter miscalculation transitions from a theoretical error into a terminal reality. The roads are not just narrow, they are treacherous ribbons of black ice and packed snow. To maintain even the slightest forward motion on a steep gradient, the tank drivers cannot rely on steady, fuel-efficient cruising. They must fight. Every meter gained is a battle between the steel tracks and the frozen ground. The Maybach HL 230 engines are forced to operate at maximum RPMs just to prevent the tanks from sliding backward into the ravines below. This is where the math of the handbook dies. In these conditions, the engine is not moving the tank forward at a constant speed. It is burning fuel merely to overcome the friction of the terrain. The 2.8-liter estimate was a phantom, a lie told by men who had forgotten that war is a physical process of moving mass across space. Behind every lead tank, a column of secondary vehicles waits in the freezing dark. Because the roads are only 3.27 meters wide, the exact width of a Panther, there is no room to maneuver. When the lead tank slows to navigate a hairpin turn or pauses to clear a fallen tree, the entire division behind it remains stationary with engines idling. In the sub-zero temperatures of the Alsace, an engine cannot be turned off. If it cools too much, the fluids will seize, and the machine will become a permanent roadblock. Consequently, thousands of liters of precious synthetic fuel are being evaporated into the winter air while the tanks are standing still. Every hour spent in a mountain traffic jam is fuel that was intended for the final thrust to the Rhine. By the end of the first 48 hours, the German spearheads have achieved their tactical objectives, but they have paid a price that is not measured in blood. They have burned through 60% of their operational fuel reserves to cover only 20% of the planned distance. The 7-liter reality has effectively cut the legs out from under the offensive before the main American defensive line has even been reached. The crews are still confident, their guns are still loaded, but the needles on their fuel gauges are moving toward the red with a terrifying, mechanical inevitability. The mountains are not just stopping the tanks, they are drinking them dry. As the German spearhead pushes deeper into the Alsace, the tactical brilliance of the Wehrmacht begins to collide with the brutal constraints of medieval geometry. The Panther tank was engineered for the vast, open horizons of the Eastern Front, where its long-range 75mm gun could dominate the battlefield from 2 kilometers away. But in the narrow valleys of the Vosges, the German army is attempting to squeeze a 20th-century industrial monster through a 15th-century needle. The roads, built centuries ago for horse-drawn timber wagons, possess a maximum width that leaves no room for error. A Panther G measures exactly 3.27 meters across. The mountain passes they must traverse are often no wider than that exact measurement. This creates a state of geometric strangulation. On a map, the 21st Panzer Division is a massive arrow of armored power. On the ground, it is a single-file line of steel stretching back for miles, trapped between stone walls and sheer cliffs. In this environment, the Blitz is replaced by a crawl. The 7-liter consumption rate becomes even more lethal because of the lack of maneuverability. If a single vehicle at the front of the column slips on the black ice or throws a track, the entire division stops. Because there is no shoulder and no bypass, the tanks behind it cannot move around the obstacle. They sit, their engines idling at high RPMs to maintain heat, burning through synthetic fuel that took months to manufacture and weeks to transport under Allied air fire. This is the hidden cost of the 7-liter miscalculation. For every hour the column is stalled by the terrain, it consumes enough fuel to have traveled 10 kilometers on open ground. The German logistical officers had planned for a war of movement, but they are fighting a war of standing still. The fuel is not being used to conquer territory. It is being used as an expensive heater to prevent the tanks from freezing solid in the mountain air. By the time the lead panzers reach the outskirts of American-held villages like Wingen-sur-Moder, they are already operating on borrowed time. The fuel gauges are lower than they were ever meant to be at this stage of the operation. The German commanders are now forced to make a desperate choice: stop and wait for a fuel column that may never arrive through the congested passes, or push forward into the American guns with tanks that are nearly empty. The industrial arrogance of Berlin had assumed that the machine would always find a way, but the geometry of the mountains has proven to be an immovable object. As Operation Nordwind enters its third day, the German panzer columns are learning that the greatest enemy of the Blitzkrieg is not the American soldier, but the idling engine. The 7-liter miscalculation is no longer just about the fuel burned while moving. It is about the fuel vanished while standing still. In the freezing climate of the Alsace mountains, a tank engine is not just a propulsion system. It is a life support unit. To shut down a Maybach engine in sub-zero temperatures is to risk a permanent mechanical seizure. Consequently, the German panzers must stay running, consuming a steady, invisible tax of synthetic fuel every minute they wait for the road to clear. The traffic jams in the narrow Vosges passes have become logistical graveyards because the roads are only 27 meters wide, the exact width of a Panther. A single mechanical failure or a minor American ambush at the front of a column creates a ripple effect that paralyzes an entire division. Behind the lead tank, hundreds of other vehicles sit nose to tail, their engines roaring at high RPMs to maintain operating temperatures and to power the hydraulic systems of their heavy turrets. On a standard paved road, these idling hours might have been a minor annoyance. But here, in the high-altitude freeze, the cost is catastrophic. The German logistical planners in Berlin had calculated fuel based on distance traveled, but the 7-liter reality is dictated by time elapsed. A Panther tank, sitting in a mountain pass for 4 hours, burns as much fuel as it would have used to travel 15 kilometers of combat maneuver. This idling tax is draining the lifeblood of the offensive before the panzers have even engaged the main American defense line. General Blaskowitz receives reports from the front that are chilling in their mathematical simplicity. Spearhead units that were supposed to be halfway to the Rhine are reporting fuel levels below 30%. The synthetic fuel, manufactured at great cost in the face of Allied bombing, is being turned into useless heat and exhaust in the frozen valleys of Alsace. The German army is effectively burning its future to stay warm in the present. The Blitzkrieg depends on momentum, but momentum requires fuel, and the fuel is evaporating in the silence of the mountains. As the offensive reaches its midway point, the German High Command is forced to confront a brutal mechanical truth. Their panzer divisions have become victims of a logistical funnel. The 7-liter miscalculation has not only drained the tanks at the front, but it has paralyzed the entire supply chain behind them. In the narrow corridors of northern Alsace, the German army is attempting to feed a massive armored beast through a straw. The supply columns, consisting of Opel Blitz trucks carrying the precious synthetic fuel, are trapped in the same geometric nightmare as the panzers. Because the roads are only 3.27 meters wide, there is no fast lane for fuel. If a Panther tank at the front is low on fuel, a fuel truck 10 miles back cannot reach it. The mountain geography has effectively decoupled the fighting spearhead from its lifeblood. To make matters worse, these idling supply trucks are also burning their own fuel just to keep their engines from freezing in the sub-zero temperatures. For every hour the fuel column sits stationary in a mountain pass, the total volume of fuel available for the tanks decreases. This is a double bleed. The tanks are starving at the front while the food is being consumed by the transporters in the rear. General Blaskowitz studies the reports with a growing sense of dread. He realizes that Nordwind is no longer a battle of maneuvers. It has become a battle against the clock and the fuel gauge. The Blitz in Blitzkrieg is gone, replaced by an agonizingly slow crawl, where every kilometer forward costs 7 times more than the planners in Berlin had dared to imagine. The panzers are approaching the main American defensive lines not with a roar of power, but with a mechanical whimper, their crews constantly glancing at needles that are hovering dangerously close to empty. The logistical funnel is closing, and the German army is being strangled by its own consumption. The dream of the Blitzkrieg is a dream of perpetual motion. It is the belief that speed and shock can outpace the enemy's ability to react. But as the 21st Panzer Division finally emerges from the claustrophobic mountain passes and reaches the relatively open ground near the American fallback positions, they find that the Blitz has been replaced by a terminal stillness. The 7-liter miscalculation has reached its logical, devastating conclusion. The panzers are no longer spearheads. They have become static steel monuments, paralyzed by the mathematics of their own consumption. For the tank crews of the Wehrmacht, the transition is a psychological blow as much as a mechanical one. They have navigated the treacherous geometric traps of the Vosges, fought the black ice, and endured the idling tax of the mountain traffic jams. They have reached the high ground, looking down upon the American lines with the most advanced optics and the most powerful tank guns in the world. On paper, this is the moment of triumph. The Panther G is designed to dominate this exact landscape. killing American Shermans from ranges where the enemy cannot even reply. But a masterpiece of engineering is useless without the energy to turn its turret or move its hull. The reality inside the turrets is a symphony of silence. The Maybach engines, which should be roaring as the tanks maneuver to exploit the breakthrough, are being shut down to conserve the final drops of synthetic fuel. A Panther tank on empty is not a weapon, it is a pillbox. It is a 45-ton static predator that cannot hunt. The crews, trained in the elegant precision of maneuver warfare, find themselves trapped in a mechanical cage. They can see the enemy, but they cannot engage in the fluid, aggressive combat that is the hallmark of the Panzer Corps. They are forced to wait, hoping for fuel trucks that are still miles away, strangled in the logistical funnel they just left behind. While the German spearhead sits paralyzed, the American 7th Army introduces them to the brutal reality of the 1945 battlefield industrial volume. General Alexander Patch does not need to maneuver against the empty panzers. He only needs to bury them in high explosives. Unlike the Germans, who must count every shell and calculate every liter, the Americans operate within a matrix of unlimited supply. Behind the American lines, the logistical machine is working with mathematical precision. Thousands of 155mm shells are being funneled into the valleys where the German tanks are stranded. The German soldiers are no longer fighting a war of soldiers. They are enduring a process of industrial excavation. The 7-liter miscalculation has placed them in a position where they cannot flee and they cannot advance. They are sitting targets for an enemy that has weaponized the factory line. The Panther G, the predator of the West, is being dismantled by the sheer blunt force of American logistics. The bravery of the crews and the brilliance of the engineering are being nullified by an empty fuel tank. In the frozen valleys of the Alsace, the master race of technology is discovering that in modern war, the factory always defeats the forge. As the German offensive grinds into a terminal halt, the American 7th Army demonstrates why the 7-liter miscalculation was not just a fuel error, but a death sentence. The Wehrmacht commanders, trained in the elegant maneuver warfare of the Prussian school, find themselves paralyzed by a force they cannot outthink, the blunt power of industrial volume, while the German Panther tanks sit as static predators in the forests, burning their final liters just to keep their radios alive. The Americans unleash a matrix of artillery that treats war as a process of excavation. The American logistical machine operates with a mathematical certainty that the Germans can no longer match. Unlike the German crews who are forced to count every shell and ration every liter of synthetic fuel, the American artillery batteries have no such restrictions. Behind the front lines, the factory Didong of the United States, a system of endless supply chains and massive production, is funneling thousands of tons of high explosives toward the frozen Vosges. General Patch utilizes the time-on-target (TOT) technique, a terrifying demonstration of American systemic superiority. This is not just shelling, it is a synchronized strike where shells from hundreds of guns, located at different distances, are timed to impact the exact same coordinate at the exact same second. For the German units stranded in the narrow valleys, there is no blitz to save them. They are not fighting soldiers. They are enduring an industrial process designed to erase them from the map. The German infantry, intended to support the panzers, is being dismantled by the proximity fuse, the VT fuse, a secret weapon that detonates shells in the air, raining shrapnel down into foxholes and ravines. The 7-liter miscalculation has placed these troops in a geometric cage. Because the tanks cannot move and the fuel trucks cannot reach them, the entire German force is pinned against the geography they sought to conquer. In the battle for cities like Hatton and Rittershoffen, the Panther's technical superiority is nullified by the sheer weight of fire. A Panther G may have the better gun, but it cannot fight a system that delivers 10,000 shells for every one it can fire back. The master race of engineering is being buried by the master system of production. The tanks are becoming steel coffins, not because of a lack of courage, but because the American factories are working 24 hours a day to prove that in 1945, war is a battle of logistics, not legends. By the third week of January, the German High Command is forced to confront the final collapse of their synthetic dream. The 7-liter miscalculation has not only stranded the frontline panzers, but has exposed the terminal decay of the Third Reich's industrial heart. While the American logistics machine flows with the effortless power of an ocean, the German supply system is a series of broken pipes leaking blood and fuel in equal measure. In the headquarters of Army Group G, General Blaskowitz watches the fuel reports with a grim Prussian detachment. He sees the 7-liter reality reflected in every failed maneuver. The synthetic fuel, laboriously manufactured from coal and transported through a gauntlet of Allied P-47 Thunderbolts, is gone. It has been consumed not by a glorious breakthrough, but by the friction of mountain ice and the invisible tax of combat idling. The American 7th Army, sensing the paralysis of their opponent, begins to tighten the geometric noose. They no longer fear the Panther's long-range sting because they know the predator is starving. American units utilize their industrial volume to launch counterattacks that are not just tactical maneuvers, but logistical suffocations. They maneuver around the frozen German columns, treating the world's most advanced tanks as mere obstacles on a map. Inside the tanks, the transition from hunter to prey is complete. The crews, who began Operation Nordwind with the hope of reaching the Rhine, are now burning the furniture of their medieval village positions just to stay warm. They look at their silent Panther Gs machines that cost a fortune in Reichsmarks and manpower and realize they have been sent into a geographical meat grinder without the one thing that could have saved them: energy. The 7-liter miscalculation was the final proof that German engineering had become disconnected from the reality of total war. They had built a weapon for a what, the open field, but failed to account for the how, the mountain logistics. In the frozen valleys of the Vosges, the German military machine is discovering that a tank without fuel is not an asset. It is a liability that anchors its army to the ground while the enemy's system erases them. By the final days of January 1945, the mechanical heart of Operation Nordwind has stopped beating. The 7-liter miscalculation has achieved its ultimate, devastating result: the total abandonment of the Third Reich's most advanced weaponry. In the snow-clogged valleys of the Vosges, hundreds of Panther G tanks, the supposed masters of the battlefield, sit silent and lifeless. They have not been destroyed by the American 76mm guns. They have been defeated by a needle pointing to zero. The scene is one of industrial tragedy. German tank crews, elite soldiers who had spent months training to master these 45-ton predators, are forced to commit the ultimate act of military despair. They are bailing out of their hatches, not because they are under fire, but because their machines have become steel anchors. The 7-liter consumption rate has exhausted the synthetic fuel reserves that were meant to last for weeks, leaving the tanks paralyzed just kilometers from their objectives. General Blaskowitz receives the final reports from the front with a cold, Prussian detachment. His warnings about the geography and the logistical funnel have been proven correct in the most humiliating way possible. The panzer divisions, the mobile reserves that were supposed to defend the Rhine and stop the Soviet advance in the east, have been ground into nothingness in the mountains of Alsace. They are not coming back. The American 7th Army, moving through the valleys, encounters these static predators abandoned in the middle of the roads. The American soldiers find tanks with full ammunition racks and pristine optics, yet their fuel tanks are bone dry. This is the 7-liter reality. A weapon of war is only as powerful as the system that feeds it. The Americans do not need better tanks. They simply have a system that never stops flowing, while the German machine has disconnected from the physical laws of supply. As the crews retreat on foot through the snow, they leave behind the industrial pride of Germany to be captured or demolished by American engineers. The Panther G, a masterpiece of engineering, has been proven a failure not in its design, but in its existence within a collapsing system. The 7-liter miscalculation was the final nail in the coffin of the Blitzkrieg, a proof that in the era of industrial warfare, courage without a fuel truck is merely a prelude to surrender. The failure of Operation Nordwind was not a failure of individual courage or tactical incompetence, but a final, brutal lesson in the mathematics of total war. The 7-liter miscalculation proved that in 1945, the era of the legendary hero was over, replaced by the era of the system. General Blaskowitz had understood the equation from the beginning. Logistics multiplied by geography equals outcome. By ignoring the 7-liter reality of the mountains, the German High Command had effectively signed the death warrant of their last mobile reserves. The strategic cost was catastrophic. The panzer divisions intended to hold the Rhine and contest the Soviet advance were left as rusted scrap in the valleys of Alsace. They were defeated by the master system, the American industrial volume that delivered unlimited fuel, proximity-fused artillery, and a logistical flow that never faltered. The American factories, working thousands of miles away, had proven that industrial capacity defeats tactical brilliance every time. The Panther G remains a symbol of this disconnect. It was a race car built for a track that did not exist. A 45-ton predator sent into a geographical cage designed to strangle it. Its technical superiority meant nothing once the fuel gauge hit zero. The 7-liter miscalculation was the final proof that the German military machine had become a static predator, detached from the physical laws of supply and reality. History is not just a collection of dates, it is a series of lessons in organization. The lesson of the Vosges is clear. You can build the most advanced weapon in the world, but if you cannot feed it, it is merely a monument to your own defeat. In the frozen silence of January 1945, the mountains didn't just win, the mathematics of industrial warfare did. Would you like me to analyze another historical battle using this same logistical and systemic framework?